Hey Saints, well we're back digging in Daniel 8. Just some interesting, I guess you'd say, coincidences. I think, well, I left off the last video where we were looking at Daniel 8, and I'd said, the kind of the conclusions were twofold. That, like down here in verse 10, the imagery was of this goat that waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the hosts and the stars to the ground, stomped on them, magnified itself to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was destroyed. And I thought, well, that something supernatural is happening there. The armies of heaven, hosts of heaven, are cast down, and the host and the stars, and we were talking about like Nephilim and the fallen angels and all that, and trying to make sense of these passages, because the classic interpretation of Daniel 8 is the same as what you see like in Daniel 11, historical context of the Medo-Persian Empire, as pictured in 7 actually as a bear with one rib coming up and then the other coming up higher or something like that. And then in Daniel 7, the Greek Empire that was pictured as a leopard comes, attacks and overpowers. Then we get to 8, and all the biblical exposition says, well, it's the same picture here, and you've got a ram with 2 horns. One comes up later and is more prominent, just like in Daniel 7, the picture of the bear. And then you get this goat that comes across and attacks it and stomps it and whatever, and the goat is fast and all this, and people say, well, there you go, it's the same story sort of being retold. And yet you read the commentaries, and I have again multiple times here taking a look at different commentaries on Daniel 8, and they all see that by the time you get down to like 10 and 11, they talk about the prophetic, look to this thing. I can't pull it out real quick. Frustrated with that. But they see the same problem, that there's something end time-ish about it, or it goes beyond just those Medo-Persian and Greek empires. And then we made the observation that this whole vision Daniel was given in chapter 8 was for a time of the end shall be the vision. And then in 19, it talks about in the end of the indignation for the time appointed, the end shall be. And we said, the appointed time was Moed, and we'd already made the connections there to the last 3 feasts and the potential fulfillment that's seen in Daniel 12. There's the appointed time mentioned again, the time of the end for this vision, and with many talking about the last horn that comes up last here in Daniel 8 being the Antichrist because of what his actions are. So that kind of gets everybody caught up. We did this Daniel 8 study, and there's always a chain of events here, and what led into the Daniel 8 study was a study we did in Daniel 11, and we noticed that the abomination of desolation that was referenced in 9 and 11 and 12 was said to be yet future by Jesus when he spoke of it again in Matthew in chapter 24. And yet most of the commentaries you look at, the Daniel 11 reference to the abomination of desolation, people would say happened with the Antiochus Epiphanes, the Greek ruler from the 160s, 170s BC. And so, Jesus didn't say, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel, in a specific chapter, he just said it. And so all three references had been yet future to when Jesus was speaking, which would have been, a couple hundred years after Antiochus Epiphanes. And so it made it an end times portrayal. And you see the same thing in here, that the daily sacrifice is taken away, right? And the place of the sanctuary is cast down and all this. And for him, daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, the truth is cast to the ground and all this. And so it's probably another reference there, once again, of the work of the Antichrist in the latter half of the tribulation period. So I left it all there. I emailed Chuck Missler because he had done a weekly update video on his channel, and he actually went back and said, yes, the abomination of desolation reference in Daniel 11 was an end times reference, which is a little bit new in terms of his teaching. He backed that up and said, I think all the way from verse, I think he said 21 or something like that in Daniel 11, even though it perfectly patterned that end times Antiochus Epiphanes, it was perfectly patterned by him, but again, since it's yet future, as Jesus quoted, he puts it all now into the end time setting. So when I emailed Chuck Missler's ministry saying, well, do we have the same situation sitting here in Daniel 8, where the common interpretation would be that the ram in this picturing is Medo-Persian Empire, with the one empire coming up latter and it's more prominent, the way the horns are depicted here, and the goat that comes and busts it up being the Grecian Empire under Alexander the Great. Since this whole vision down here in when it's being interpreted by Gabriel, I guess it is said to be for the time of the end. This vision is for the time of the end. What I emailed them and said, are we sure that even though this is perfectly patterning the Medo-Persian Empire being defeated by the Greeks, are we sure that this is not in its entirety an end times prophecy passage? And I never got a response. So I'll bring you up to this morning now. Go to church. We had a little small group impromptu gathering after church, and one of the sisters that's in our small group that has been watching some of these videos anyways on this channel talked about the Daniel 8 and said, well, what is it? What is it with this goat? Where, who is it that's flying across the whole earth? Is he an airplane? Or forget what she said there, but I told her basically the big aha to me was that in verses 17 and 19, this whole vision was called a vision for the end of days, the end time, even though most people would say that this whole initial part was Medo-Persia being defeated by the Greek Empire way in the past. And so I said, well, there you go, that was the insight. And that wasn't so good. She's like, yeah, but what is it, what's going on here? And so that's tonight's deal, and I'm glad that came up. I was thinking about this on and off for quite a while because there's some weird things here that confirm that this really isn't Medo-Persia being defeated by the Greek Empire. It perfectly patterns it, but that's not it. And the first thing I'll note is the plain text interpretation of 17, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. So boom, there's the first problem. Plain text interpretation says this is an end times passage. So let's, cast out for the moment out of your brain that classic teaching, and now we got some difficulty in front of us, because where is this in the end time in the end times thing, right? Well, let me show you some stuff here. So first thing I want to do is take a look at goats and rams, because those are the two things being pictured here. And for folks that watched the last live show I did with Pastor Patrick, I just happened to do symbols in the Bible with him. And we noted how symbols are consistently used in the Bible. So if you find a symbol used, in Genesis, it's going to be used the same way when you get to Daniel or Revelation. And that's the biblical interpretation rule, or what they call a hermeneutic, called expositional constancy. And so the first problem we've got with this passage, problem with the classic interpretation, I should say, is that a goat is defined by the Bible and a ram is defined in its usage in the Bible. So let's take a quick look at how are goats identified and how are rams identified. And then I think we're going to be getting somewhere, because those symbols would be used, like I say, consistently in the Bible. I guess now I'm just thinking about this out loud. Chapter 7 gave us the definition for the Medo-Persian Empire. It's a bear. And it gave us the definition for the Alexander the Great Empire. It's a leopard. So when you get here, you wouldn't think, when you get to 8, you wouldn't think Daniel would screw up his metaphors, that close, I should really say the Holy Spirit. And so, that metaphor is pointing you away from that being the historical context, that it should be something else. And so let's just take a look at Exodus 12, 1 through 5. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb according to their house of their fathers, a lamb for a house. And if the house is too little for the lamb, let him be his neighbors next to his house. Take it according to the number of the souls. Every man according to his eating shall make you count for the lamb. For your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. He shall take it out from the sheep or from the goats. And I just found that really compelling. Sheep and goats have two different uses in the Bible. You guys will remember this now. Probably don't have to go read it to you, but you get to Matthew 25 and you see the sheep and goat judgment. The sheep enter into the millennial reign, and the goats get cast into, I forget if that's outer darkness or hell or whatever. So you already have a context. Goats are bad, sheeps are good. And I think it's really interesting here that even on the day of Passover, every man was supposed to go take for themselves and their family from the sheeps or from the goats. They're identifying with sheeps or they're identifying with goats, just the way you see it in Revelation. The sheep and the goats. And when you get to Matthew 25, they don't even know. They say, when did I see you blind and naked and in jail and all this? And Jesus is judging them, saying, because of what you did to the least of these, my brethren, right? And so your people, whether they know it or not, they're picking to be of the sheep or of the goats. So I just think this is really pretty interesting. Now, we get some really wacky stuff here. So I want you to hang on to this idea of sheeps and goats being bad, sheeps being good, and recognize that the ram is the male leader of the sheep And what we're going to look at now is this goat, and a type of goat as it's called here in the Bible. Now let me show you. Okay, we're back here in Daniel 8, verse 21, and this is Gabriel interpreting the vision that Daniel just received. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia. So the goat mentioned above now has a designator on him. He's the rough goat. It's a sa'ir, shaggy, a he-goat, and actually that's the way it's translated up above, a he-goat. A devil, a goat, a hairy kid, a rough, and a satyr, right? That's the chimera, the blended goat man thing, right? And I just want to show you this here. The shaggy goat is the sa'ir, meaning a shaggy, hairy he-goat, a satyr, and it's also there in Isaiah 13. What does that lead you to? That's the end times reference. We saw actually the Nephilim references are in there. It's the goat of the sin offering. Boom. So it was starting to get interesting there. If I had that little sound effect of a needle scratching a record, that now would be a good time for that. And then there's something else. Is it calls him the first king. And so I started saying, what does that get us? It's the first king. H7223 is the first. And I just went and I did a separate lookup on that one. I actually was just using Strong's on this one. So the first king, first in place or time or rank, an ancestor, the before time, the beginning, the eldest and the first. So it's an ancestral relationship, right? It's the historical first king. And I'm like, this is really odd. And then there's one other thing that feeds in here. This word Greece that's used in here is another odd thing here. Now, hang on. So in Hebrew, Greece or Grecia is this Yavan, and it's really Yavan, the descendant of Joktan, and the race is called the Ionians, that is the Greeks, descended from their territory, also a place in Arabia. And I thought, well, that's kind of odd. Now, Greece is really then this biblical descendant, and I wanted to catch this here. Hang on. So this is the word in Hebrew for Greece. Yavan, Hebrew Standard, was the fourth son of Noah's, son of Japheth, according to the Table of Nations in the Hebrew Bible. Flavius Josephus states the traditional belief that this individual was the ancestor of the Greek people. Okay, so there I think we're getting it. We're looking for the first, king of the Greek people. Well, that was Javan, or what's also known in the Greek world is Ion. Let's see if we just get here. Name for Greeks or Greeks in general, Yavan, Yawan, was long considered a cognate of the name of the Eastern Greeks, the Ionians. There. Okay. The Greek race has been known by cognate names throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, Near East, and beyond. In Greek mythology, the eponymous forefather of the Ionians is similarly called Ion, son of Apollo. I thought, whoa, I get that they claim that that's, part of, quote, mythology, but we know this whole thing. You've got Javan, who was a a literal, descendant from Noah, historically being thought of as the son of Apollo. And when you dig into who this Javan or Ion is, he was the illegitimate child of this Crucia, the daughter of and the wife of whatever. Crucia conceived Ion with Apollo, so he's Nephilim. I mean, according to the mythology, okay? According to the mythology, he's the product of Apollo and that woman. Javan is also found in apocalyptic literature in the book of Daniel. Yes, we know that. And they're trying to say, oh, it's a reference to Alexander the Great. Well, not in this case. Well, Javan is generally associated with ancient Greeks. His sons have usually been associated with locations in the northeastern Mediterranean Sea, and in Tarshish, and Cyprus, Kittim, and all this type of thing. So I thought, okay, we've got the historical thinking that possibly that he was Nephilim. And it's backed up by people you probably would respect. The opinion that Javan is synonymous with Greek Ion, thus fathered some of the Ionians, is common to numerous writers of the early modern period, including Sir Walter Raleigh, Samuel Bogart, John Mill, and Jonathan Edwards, and is still frequently encountered today. So you got some pretty bright people saying that this Javan in the Bible is Ion, son of Apollo. I just think, wow, that's pretty heavy duty. So let's keep going here then. That would be the first king. And the rough goat, so the demonic goat, it even says that if you look at the ISV, I thought this was cool, the demonic goat is the king of Greece. So we're coming completely out of that historical context. Now, if you ask me, this is locked, sealed, done. I mean, I don't want to be too bold because, interpretation is, you stand on the shoulders of great people, but to me, it's just like there's too many things piling up against the historical fulfillment that this has to be the end time fulfillment. So you got the demonic goat king here. Now rams are interesting too, and I think this one's a lot easier. So Genesis 22. I'll do this one more quickly. I don't think this is too tough. Like in verse 13. Abraham looked up and behind him to see a ram caught by its horns in the thicket. So Abraham went over and grabbed the ram and offered it as a burnt offering place of his son. And so this is Abraham offering up his only son Isaac on Mount Moriah. And there that is definitely the foreshadowing of Christ, the substitutionary sacrifice, right? And so the ram is the substitutionary sacrifice. It's a picture of Jesus. And so you get what's going on here. Goats, we had donkey satyrs, and we had demonic definition to them, and they were the sin offering, and all this. That's goats. And rams here, the first reference we look at here is that picture of Jesus and the offering of Isaac, his only son. It also, there's interesting allusions, Exodus 26. I might have mentioned this on a different video, but these things are all cool. You're to make a cover for the tent. Now this is the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, I guess. The ram skins dyed red is the covering of the tent. Is that giving you a little picture? The covering is dyed red, and if you dig into this, I did a whole study on the red dye used, and that's the worm or the maggot, and when that worm or maggot dies, it leaves a stain on the bark on the tree that it dyes, a red stain like a cross, that one's deeper than you can possibly go, but that was actually the dye for these skins is that worm or maggot that perfectly pictures Christ dying on the cross as well. So the whole thing is just deep, 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 deep. It goes all the way down. And then I won't drag you through all this, but the rams in Leviticus 16 are the burnt offering. In 19, they're the trespass offering. In Numbers 5, it's stated as the atonement offering. And number 6, it's the peace offering. I hope that rings more than one bell in your head. I mean, this is all just screaming Jesus, isn't it? And then Ezekiel 34:17, it's really interesting. It says God will judge his people, and it says between the cattle and the rams and the goats. Now, the interpretation in that passage means the common people and the leading and the rulers, but it just is interesting that rams and goats were pictured as what he's judging, again using symbolism at the end of the age, because what we're going to say about this whole Daniel 8 thing is it's the supernatural realm. It's the picture of God's people versus Satan's people, and you're getting the rams and the goats pictured being judged at the end of the age in Ezekiel 34, and probably the simple plain text interpretation would be God's people being judged, the cattle it says, and that says the rams and the goats, and they interpret that as the leaders of the people, but we're learning here rams and goats have a deeper symbology, and it's really as interesting as Ezekiel 39:18. Let's take a quick peek at that one here. Ezekiel 39:18. You will eat the flesh of mighty men and drink the blood of the world's princes, drinking the blood of these rams, lambs, goats, bulls, all of them fatted as they're from Bashan, fit for the slaughter. And that's the ISV too. Let's fatlings of Bashan. And Ezekiel 38 and 39, my personal opinion is I think we demonstrated that where it's talking about the mighty men here, it's talking about that somehow the Nephilim have returned. And there's too many videos to catch you up on that Bible study, but in 38 in the list of nations that come down, it includes the mighty men coming down, and Joel 1 and 2 give us more of a hint of who they are, and the fact that they're supernatural, they fall on swords, and they're not injured and all this, and so it's just deep, deep, deep. And then in Revelation 6 at seal 4, they're the Therion, the wild beasts. It's the same kind of reference there. It's the same beast as used in Revelation 13 of the Antichrist and the false prophet. And so these things just connect together. So you get the context then, is the rams and the goats, that we're picturing the supernatural, God's people versus Satan's people here. And that picturing is used consistently. Now, so we did Javan is translate Greek or Greece or Grecians. Let's go back to our Daniel 8 stuff. And then Zechariah 9, we get another little end times peek here. Verse 13, you see what the title is here? If this helps. The coming king of Zion, so you know this is cast into the future. And 13, when I have bent Judah for me, filled the bow with Ephraim, and raised up thy sons, O Zion, against thy sons, O Greece, and made thee as a sword of a mighty man. And we talked quite a bit about the last regathering, where you get both Judah and Israel brought back into the land and judged. And now after they're judged, they're going to come out against, oh, Greece. I mean, what does that mean? It's not going to be one little country, right? It's the same picturing here that Greece, that's Javan being used here, and God's going to judge the Satan's people after the second coming. So you can see that end times context all fits here, and the usage of Greece, it's the same thing as Javan here. He's using it in that end times context in Zechariah 9, so we're getting confirmation. Now I looked up the river Ulai, where this vision of Daniel took place, and I can't repeat it. I don't know what happened. One of the definitions I saw for the river Ulai was following the leaders or something like that. And at the time when I was sitting in the car on my phone, I thought, man, that is good, because that's what we're talking about, is the leaders of the rams being the leaders of God's people and the goats being the leaders of Satan's people. And I thought that's, maybe that's why he's getting the vision as being in Shushan there at the river Ulai. So I just want to scrape this all together now. Let's read Daniel. It's not a very long chapter. Let's just read it and plug in some of these concepts that we've grabbed, and then let's relate this to the other picture we get in Revelation of the end times. Okay. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me, Daniel, after that which appeared me at first. And I saw in the vision, it came to pass, when I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam. Now he's in Iran, today is Iran. And I saw in a vision, and I was by the river Ulai. Again, maybe that means the leaders, right? Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. Okay, let's pause, let's plug in what we know. If the ram is God's people, and they're pointing to 2 horns that came up, but the second one came up, and it was higher, could that be a picture of the 2 families of God, the Jewish people and the Christians, with the Christians coming up later and being higher? I think that's what you got. And I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward. Now, Paul on his apostolic journey was told not to enter into Asia, right? I mean, he went into Turkey and all that, but the spread of Christianity went down into the African countries. It went west, and into Europe and all that, and it went north, as well. So maybe I'm just trying to figure out what these horns might represent here. And again, this is a spiritual picture. I'm convinced of this. We got to stop thinking about historical leaders like Alexander the Great and the Medo-Persians and all that. This is in the context of spiritual leadership. Okay. And I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward, and so no beast could stand before him. And I thought that was interesting. And nothing could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will, and he became great. And I was considering, behold, a he-goat came from the west and across the face of the whole earth. Now that's interesting too, because again, in the case of Alexander the Great, coming out of the west across the whole earth doesn't make sense if it literally means that, because Alexander the Great, he accomplished a lot in terms of what he conquered, but it was, he stopped in India. It wasn't bounded by the whole earth. Touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And I thought, well, that's interesting. What is that? And he came to the ram that had two horns, and I'd seen standing before the river, and ran to him with fury and power. Now, I was trying to pull this together earlier, and I'll give you my speculation. The one horn between his eyes that it starts off with, what if that is literally Ion, the son of Apollo? Because down below it says he's the first king, and that would be Javan, and he's called the king of Greece. So again, that would point me back, unfortunately, to the Nephilim. And so just hang on to your hats now. I know what this sounds like it couldn't be, but I think it might be. Okay. Okay, so he covered the whole face of the earth. He came to the ram that had two horns, which I see standing before the river, ran unto him with fury and power. And I saw him come close unto the ram. He was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his two horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but cast to the ground and stomped on him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Well, if the ram was God's people, the Jews and the Christians, then whatever this is killing the Jews and the Christians. Whatever this Nephilim is killing the Jews and the Christians. If we're just literally substituting what we know about goats and rams and about this hairy goat leader, the demonic goat, and all this type of thing, we're just plugging it in. And therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. And I was thinking, there's a problem, because in my mind at first, that great horn they started with, I thought was the Antichrist. And I said, well, the Antichrist isn't broken till the end of the deal here. But here he's broken, and up came four notable ones toward the four winds of where? Heaven. So again, we're in the spiritual context. Then I went, okay, let's take this step by step. What if that first goat that comes up in the notable horn is this Ion, the son of Apollo, or one of the descendants, right? Because it was talking about the descendancy, the first king. And so, Ion, one of his descendants maybe, or him himself. And this is the problem we have with Gog, by the way. When you get to Gog, people say, well, does that just mean the preeminent ruler of the age? Or since Gog shows up in the Septuagint, Numbers 24, it shows up again in Amos 7 in the Septuagint, it shows up again in Ezekiel 38, it shows up again in Revelation 20, I think it is, pardon me. Is it somehow a spirit, or the spirit of the Nephilim, or a resurrected Nephilim? I mean, there's debate on all sides, and here we go. You've got this Javan or Ion, potentially being second or third generation there from Noah, third generation I think it was, from Noah, Javan, the founder of the Ionians, which is the Greeks, which is how you're getting your translation here. But historically, potentially a Nephilim, son of Apollo and a human woman, right? Same problem as Gog. So there you go. So this whole thing is just very interesting. And he waxed great, and he was strong. And the great horn was broken, and up came four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. And out of one of them came the fourth horn, which waxed exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and the stars of the ground, and stamped on them. Now, last time we got into that, I forget which translation, maybe the ISV I used. Then it moved against the heavenly army. It persuaded some of the army to fall to earth along with some of the stars, and it trampled them. You know, there's, depending on which version you look at, it's hard to say who is being trampled. Is it the fallen? Is it the army being fallen that's getting trampled, or is it the heavenly army coming down trampling things? There's a little confusion in the different translations, but let's just keep rolling with it. You get that we're definitely talking now the Antichrist or Satan's minions here. Yea, and he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. There you go. And by him the daily sacrifice was taken away. There you go. In the place of a sanctuary cast down. And the host of heaven, and the host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression. And it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and it prospered. Well, we know the Antichrist practices and prospers. And I heard the one saint speaking to the other, saying unto him, the certain saint which spake, how long shall the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression and desolation to give both the sanctuary and the host be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And we determined in that last go through that 2,300 days is very likely from when Christ enters the millennial temple, counting backwards 2,300 days to when the temple is first erected. That fits with all these other passages that we put together. So you see where I'm going with this now, because Daniel's interpretation then makes sense that the demonic goat is the first king of Grecia, Ion, the son of Apollo, and that I don't know what to do, and maybe somebody's smarter than me. The two horns you saw are the two kings of Media and Persia. I don't know what to do with that, and I'm just going to be upfront about it. I was thinking about it. How is that representing God's people now in the spiritual? And I'm not sure. So I'm just going to leave that for somebody to help me dig out. And then I said, well, where does this story play out? Where do you have God's people being stomped on by a Nephilim kind of a dude who then gets killed, right? And then all of a sudden to the four winds go, the lesser spirits, or however you look at it. And the only thing I can think of, saints, is that it's pointing us back to Revelation 6. Because what we have here is that when they get to the pale horse, sorry, I'm just like thrashing here. I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed him. And the power was given unto him over a fourth part of the earth to kill with the sword, hunger, death, and with the therion, the beasts of the field. And I thought, we did quite a number tying up, maybe making some linkages there that this seal right here, the fourth seal, was the Ezekiel 38-39 war, and that these beasts were the Nephilim returning to earth. And then I thought, well, that's starting to make some sense. If Ion's the son of Apollo, a Nephilim, and he's the first king of Greece, is it telling us that Ion, that son of Apollo, is the Gog of the Gog-Magog war? And when he comes, here he's got death and hell following him. What did we see in Daniel 8? He had some of the host of heaven and some of the angels coming down. Sorry, that's probably the latter horn that comes up. But you've got death of the rams, right, that couldn't stand against him, and you've got the rams as God's people. And in right after seal 4, what do you have? And when he opened the fifth seal, he saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God, that's God's people, and for the testimony which they held. So I don't know, saints. So they're, what people call the tribulation saints there. Now, I personally don't think the tribulation technically starts until the great day of wrath has come. I think that's the start of the 70th week. So technically they're not in the tribulation. But I think the pattern fits that if CO4 is the Ezekiel 38-39 war, if that is Gog-Magog war, including Nephilim, Gog as their leader being a Nephilim, and the army that we saw in Joel 1 and Joel 2 that participates in that war, some being Nephilim, I can see that this fits then. And so it's Gog that comes down. He kills a fourth part of the earth with death and with a sword and with the Therion, the beasts of the field, his heavenly, I'll say second heaven kind of a satanic army. And who is he killing? He's killing what's pictured as the rams. He's killing the Christians and the Jews, right? And then the Gog-Magog war finishes with him trying to enter to kill the rest of the Jews in Israel, right? And then God takes care of them. And Gog ends up buried in the valley of Hamon-Gog in that passage. And then the rest of the tribulation continues on after that. So that fits the pattern of the great horn being broken, right? And yet after the great horn's broken, the four spirits come up after that, and out of that, one little horn, which is clearly the Antichrist, is being pictured at that point in Daniel 8. And so that fits that this Gog-Magog thing happens. He gets broken. He gets put in the valley of Hamon-Gog. And then you see actually Apollo returning in Revelation 9. And you see the Antichrist, right, entering into the temple at the midpoint, right there in Revelation. He enters, I think, in 10, where they're measuring the temple, but it's told that he's there in Revelation 13. So I think that fits the pattern, saints. And like I say, I don't know when it's referencing the kings of Media and Persia in Daniel 8. I haven't quite tied that up. What's the spiritual significance of that? But there's far too many things in Daniel 8, including the plain text interpretation, to just leave it that all what we see here is the Medo-Persia being conquered by Alexander the Great's Grecian army. I think, now I have to hit the can't be button. There's just way too many forward-looking references, including the plain text interpretation of 17 and 19 here, where it's the whole vision is of the end. So I'll leave you there, saints. We're pecking away at it. I feel like, man, this thing is double dog deep. I don't know. There's a lot in here, but this is the fun stuff. This is what the Lord left, in my humble opinion, for the end days when he says knowledge will increase. I think he's given us meaning behind the passages as we get closer to us going home. He's probably revealing the last of the things that were in the sealed book, right? I mean, not everything, because the Bible's infinite, but I just think the framework and the meaning of these major blocks appear to be being released. So I'll leave you there. And I mentioned Apollo actually shows up himself in Revelation 9, so you can go check that out. If his son gets killed there in Revelation 6, it's interesting that the destroyer, the Spirit himself, shows up in 9. So God bless everybody. Hope to see you upstairs soon.